Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is the Battlefield 1 beta, and in today's video I wanted to talk about Armour, how it's changed from Battlefield 4, whether or not it is now too strong, and why it is so strong when compared to previous Battlefield games. Now to start things off, obviously Armour is stronger in Battlefield 1 than it has been in previous Battlefield games, especially when comparing to a game like Battlefield 4. Now this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly going to have some resistance within the community because some players prefer to play very low armor intensive game, more infantry focused, while others will prefer to play full out conquest with planes, with armor, with explosions going on everywhere, the full Battlefield experience. Undoubtedly is, however, that Armour has increased within strength, and likely it's going to stay that way. It's been stated by the DICE development team that this is what they want for this game. They want Armour to be really strong and feared by infantry, and as such they've done a good job of implementing that. And the question really is, why is it so much stronger, and is it maybe too strong in some situations? And that's what we'll be discussing today. Now, starting off with some of the changes that have actually happened to the armor itself, the tanks themselves. First of all, they've got slightly more hit points, while in my experience this is maybe about 20% more, maybe 30% more. It is enough to make something like a rocket gun impossible to fully use when taking out a tank. That is to say, you need more than just one person firing all of his rockets or munition in his rocket gun to take out a tank. I like to compare the rocket gun a little bit to an RPG. 4 or 5 RPGs was enough to take out a tank. 4 or 5 rocket gun shots are not. You're going to need a minimum of 6, at least in my experience, unless you hit that perfect 20 damage every single time, in which case you'll need 5. But that's unlikely to happen, and therefore you usually need to get behind with some C4 and grenades afterwards if you want to take out that armor vehicle. So we have a small increase in hit points. Furthermore, we have an increase in player counts. Now the small tank, this is only a 1-player tank. It's still very powerful, but truly the medium and large tanks with 3 or even 5 or 6 players in them are amongst the strongest vehicles we've ever seen in the Battlefield history when it comes to ground vehicles. And as such, when fully staffed, these are very juicy targets to take out, but they also are almost impossible to approach as infantry from any side. Taking the example of the heavy tank, if you have 6 people in this tank, they can cover every single angle any infantry will ever approach. They may not be able to take armor on from every single angle, but they can take on anybody running towards them with C4 or a anti-tank grenade. They will likely spot anybody using a rocket gun, and therefore it can be very difficult to take out some of these vehicles, especially as infantry player. Last but not least, to the strength and additions to the tanks themselves, we of course have the repair mechanic, which makes repairing tanks a lot less dangerous. I don't know if you know this from Battlefield 4, but if you play Battlefield 4 a lot, which I assume most of you here on my channel have, you know occasionally you're going to get shot at, maybe even sniped when repping your tank. And if you're a repper, actually the driver himself, because you don't have a gunner who's doing it for you, this actually means that sometimes you lose your tank to the enemy, who then take it from you. Therefore, repping in Battlefield 1, or at least in the beta, is of course far less dangerous. It doesn't really have a chance of hurting you. You can't get killed unless your tank actually blows up, which makes taking out tanks in the long term a little bit harder because repairing them is so much easier. Now, last but not least, to the changes of the tanks themselves, there is also kind of a drawback, a negative change, a weakening of armor that we have, and that comes down to the mobility and speed of tanks. This is just historically given. If they would have made the tanks as fast as they actually were in Battlefield 4, the realismus aspect of everything would have just gone way out of the window. They are faster than they originally were from a historical point anyway, but they are slower. Their acceleration is slower, their turning is slower. And for a matter of fact, they can't always see in all angles. The small tank has still a turret option, so you can kind of turn your tank fully. But for example, the heavy tank with its front gun at the front is rather immobile, and that is if you have somebody suddenly approaching you from a back, that's an armored vehicle. By the time you've turned that tank around to fire at it, likely you're either already down to something like 30 or 40 health, or you're going to have to abandon your tank straight away because you're basically damaged too much to still get in the fight. But that's the changes to armor themselves, and it's not what makes the armor also powerful. Those changes, in my opinion, are rather small, and with the kind of added mobility and speed decrease that these tanks are having, it's not too impactful in the game. What is, however, a little bit more impactful are the next few points that we're going to be talking about, because of course the strength of an armored vehicle is also determined by the environment it is in and the opponents that it faces. Now, talking about the environment, then, that will mostly be map design. And of course, the maps we've seen up to now have been very open, especially the distances between objectives are usually very hard to cross as infantry without getting sniped or shot by a tank, because cover is a very rare thing. And if there is one rock to hide behind, everybody knows you're going to be hiding behind that. And as soon as you pop your head out, you're going to get shot in the face. This makes Armour unbelievably strong. However, this also existed in some Battlefield 4 maps. To take an example, Golmud Railway, one of the biggest Armour maps in Battlefield 4, had a very similar layout or a similar strategy or map design philosophy as Sinai Desert had in the Battlefield 1 beta. Because of course you had the objectives where small cover was available, a little bit of close quarter was possible, and sometimes it was a little bit more dangerous for Armour to approach those. You also had points A and B, which were kind of a larger infantry area, much like you have C and D now on Sinai Desert, but between the objective points you usually had open large areas with the odd bit of hill and rock, which did make it possible to hide. But once that tank came over the ridge and saw you, there was only a prayer to be said, and you were then blasted to hell and back. And that's very similar to what we have now in the Battlefield 1 beta. What does make me worry a little bit is that it wasn't the case for all Battlefield 4 maps. Because of course, if you look at something like Siege of Shanghai, Dawnbreaker, you didn't have the same kind of openness between the objectives that you did have with something like Golmud Railway. Yet the maps that we have up to now seen, both in the closed alpha and the public beta, have indicated kind of this map building philosophy, with objectives where close quarter combat is available and large open distances between different objectives, making it very easy for Armour and snipers to pick off. So that is still kind of in development, yet to be seen how that turns out. I am looking forward to seeing a few further maps, maybe in another future beta, or once they are released in form of trailers or any kind of announcements through EA or DICE. But the most important point, at least in my opinion, is not that of the map design. It's of the opponents that you face on that map and how they are equipped. Starting off with infantry. Infantry has been significantly weakened when fighting against Armour in Battlefield 1. Nothing compares to the power of an RPG when looking at something like the rocket gun or even the anti-tank grenades. Even C4 has been nerfed, no longer sticking to the armored target, making hitting moving targets with C4 very difficult because they won't be demobilized by one or two of the C4 sticks. This now, of course, being called dynamite, no longer C4. So infantry have very poor weaponry when compared to previous Battlefield games where C4 or dynamite was stronger, and rocket launchers had excellent range and were easy to use because you didn't have to set them up on a ledge, no longer making you vulnerable. You could just peek at your head, shoot, disappear behind cover, and the tank had no clue where the shot came from. But most important, last but most importantly in my opinion, are the armored, more likely airborne opponents that tanks now face. While tank versus tank is still very dangerous, most importantly in maps with Golmud Railway were supreme pilots, both in helicopters, attack jets and stealth jets. They were a good tank driver's worst nightmare because a good strafing run could put you down to something like 20 HP on your tank, especially if you didn't have your APS waiting. A good bombing run could completely obliterate you and leave you demobilized somewhere in the middle of the map where you didn't want to be standing and where you had very poor chances of actually getting out and repairing without getting sniped. This is no longer the case in Battlefield 1. Yes, we still have planes, we no longer have attack choppers or any kind of helicopters, but we still do have planes, but they have been significantly weakened when comparing to their previous counterparts in Battlefield 4. Bombers are probably still the best way of taking out tanks. However, because they are so very slow, while they may be able to pull off one successful bombing run, the pilot of the tank, that is the driver of the tank, usually has enough time to repair the tank close to full health before the bomber can take another run at the tank. And this is very different from Battlefield 4, where of course the planes were so much more versatile and the second run would quickly follow on the first and you had little chance to repair the tank. Furthermore, of course, tank repairing is now much easier. Therefore, bombers are not very strong against tanks anymore, and of course any other kind of planes are very weak. There's very few that even have weapons that can properly damage tanks. The anti-tank gun that you can put on some of the planes only does as much damage as a normal tank shot would, and lining that up can be highly difficult. Therefore, airborne threats are very low for the tanks. tanks don't really have to fear the airborne threat anywhere close to as much as they used to back in Battlefield 4. And this comes with beneficial map design, stronger tanks, and weakened infantry against the armored vehicles. It starts to explain why these tanks are so strong in the Battlefield beta right now, and why basically all infantry just turns and runs as soon as they see one coming up the street. And I hope I've been able to give you a little bit of an insight into why tanks are that much stronger. It's not only because the tanks themselves have seen buffs, but in my opinion mainly because of the environment and their main opponents that have been weakened or changed to their benefit. Do I think tanks are too strong? I think it's too early to say, frankly. I think in Conquest right now, on the map Sinai Desert, it's a little bit on the upper end of towards too strong. However, this is one of the open maps, and I'm expecting Battlefield to have a variety of maps, many maps with a lot more close quarter combat as well, where tanks won't be quite as strong and therefore not so much of a problem. On Rush, on the other hand, as I did say in my Rush guide video on how to fix Rush, how to make Rush great again, I think they are currently too powerful, but this is once more down to a few other factors than we have discussed today, with these factors we're having now more being geared towards the Conquest game mode than something like a Rush or other game modes. Maybe we'll see some more interesting announced in the next few weeks by DICE. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching this video. I'd like to know your opinions both on tanks and the way they're balanced in their current state and environment. Feel free to leave that and your video suggestions down below in the comments. But with all that being said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 beta video.